Hi, I'm Simon. I'm here at Unit 2 in Brighton, and today I'm tattooing a Salvador Dali and Mr. Bean colour mashup. Ready?
Ready.
Let's go. So before we start, I thought I'd just show you a few of the things that I use on my workstation. My main machine, and the machine I've pretty much used since day one, is the FK Irons Flux. And just recently I've added the Acus machine, which is my slightly softer machine. It's a 3mm cam, and the FK Irons is a 4. The main creams and stencil solution are all from my amazing sponsors, Butterlux, which I also have my own flavour coming out very soon, so definitely check that out. The inks I use are Fusion. I've used Fusion again since day one, and in terms of the style I do for all those bright punchy colours, Fusion's always been #1, and they just provide such a great range of bright colours. The needles I use for mostly everything are Quadrant, medium taper soft edge mags, and long taper round shaders and liners. I just find the precision of Quadrant are just unmatched, so I have to use them in everything I do. I also use the Hive caps, just because I find it neater, colour gets messy, so having everything nicely and neat just makes my day a lot easier. I also use tattoo armour pads for my aftercare process, just because I find it so much easier just to wrap them up, let the customer go on their way, and it keeps the healing process a lot simpler, and it's just drying it out, and these seem to just be working an absolute treat. So that's everything on my workstation. Let's get into the stencil. So the first thing I do is get all the skin prepped and the legs shaved, and I'll usually use the Butterlux foam just to keep the skin moisturized and just makes it a little less aggravated on the skin when I'm shaving them. I'll always try and be as gentle as possible when I'm shaving them, just because I don't want to aggravate the skin any further, especially before we've even started tattooing. So I just want to have the skin as nice and smooth as possible so it's all ready to go. I kind of just try and stay in one motion, just so it's sort of nice and even all the way up. And I think that's pretty much done. The next thing I'd usually do once the client's shaved is, whilst I'm preparing my stencils, I'll put some moisturizer on, wrap it in cling film, just to sort of moisturize the leg as much as possible, just so it's easier to work with, and it helps the whole process throughout the day. The reason why I do moisturize them for sort of 10-15 minutes before, just purely because I've found over time that keeping the skin nice and hydrated as much as possible, it just helps the process for me personally. It makes the skin easier to work with. Even before the appointment, I'll always ask my customers to moisturize daily for at least a week before, because especially with this amount of heavy work and saturation and trauma to the skin, is the healthier the skin, the more hydrated, the easier it is on me, and I feel like it improves the heel in the long term. I'm going to get my client to stand up so I can position the stencil, get everything in line, and have him stood as naturally as possible. So now the stencil's all sized up, I'm going to put some markers on the leg to make sure I've got it exactly where I want it in place and make sure it's on the right angle that I need it to be. With a lot of my designs, I make sure that the focal points, like the eyes, are down the center, just because they're where I want people to focus on when the piece is completed. So now all my markers are in place and it's exactly where I want it to be. It's now time to apply the stencil solution. I usually apply 2 layers, so I'll do 1 layer, really massage it into the skin, almost make it tacky so it's literally like glue. Let that sort of dry off for a few minutes, then put a whole nother layer on. And once my stencil is on, I'll even let the client sort of chill for 10-15 minutes, just because I need that stencil to be so completely dried out, just so it lasts the whole day. So I usually apply my stencil solution twice, just to make sure that it's extra tacky, extra sticky, just so that stencil lasts throughout the whole day. And even when the stencil is on, I'll take 10-15 minutes for it to completely dry out. I'll almost wipe it down with tissue paper until nothing shows, just so I know it's completely dry. So So I'll massage the stencil solution in until it literally feels like glue and it's like tacky on the skin, just because I know that it's gonna stick to every part of the stencil. Because there's so much going on in my designs, I really rely on having like perfect stencils. And now it's time for the stencil. So I'll just slowly press down the center of the stencil just to get it locked in on the skin. And then from top to bottom, I'll just slowly start to pat the stencil around, because obviously it's on a curve, which does make it a little harder to get it all perfect. A cool little tip as well, when you're putting the stencil paper on, is to make loads of cuts in the paper, just so it makes it easier to like fold around the leg, especially on like placements like this, which obviously have a very dramatic curve around. So I need to have some leeway in the stencil paper to get it on. I rarely get to peel the stencil off in one take, so fingers crossed. Cool, now the stencil's on, we leave this for 10-15 minutes to completely dry off. So I'm ready to start the tattoo, and generally with these kind of designs, I'll always do my like line work and black sections in first, just to give me some sort of security as to like the shapes and stuff that I'm building up over the piece, and it just makes me relax a lot more once my line work and stuff's done. So most of the time with like line work in this kind of stuff, because I don't want my lines to sort of heal darker than the saturated black parts that they're in, I'll use a small round shader, maybe a 5 or a 7, just to sort of almost like sketch in the lines, so I can come back in and pack in those sections with the blacks. And early on in the piece is I won't wipe too much, because again, I want to keep my stencil for as long as possible. So I do a lot of just like dabbing, just to keep the excess ink away from the skin, just so I can see the stencil and just keep everything as tidy as possible throughout. So I usually pull my lines towards me, just purely because that was sort of how I was taught from day one, and it's what feels comfortable for me. But I'm slowly trying to adjust into like pulling away from me, just because I feel like it is better on the skin. So the way I stretch the skin most of the time is I use like 3 different points. So it's my thumb and index finger is stretching one side, and then using the back of my palm to do the other. So it's like a full stretch, sort of 360, just so the skin is as tight as possible, just so I feel even more secure with like my tattoo hand. With a lot of these like black little chunks throughout the design, is like I'm doing now, is like I'll sort of line them in a bit and then use a mag to like saturate those areas, but then if I have to, just to make it as clean as possible, and hopefully so when it heals, the line work doesn't heal darker, is then I'll go back in with a round shader just to like neaten up those little areas. So the way I judge my needle depth is, I feel like before every line or before every like section that I'm about to pack, is I almost do like it's almost like a little run up. So I don't just go straight in and waft it in, because you know, you run the risk of blowing it out or going too deep. So I almost sort of like sketch in a little bit, and then find my balance with my hand and my stretch hand, and then just almost like slowly like ease into it every time. And also with lines, I'll slowly go into it and I'll slowly come out of it. So when I have to go back in, there's no like, I don't want to be left with like thick dots in between my lines where I've like continued on from. I think a really helpful thing for me as well, with sort of the slowly like easing into each line as well, is you want to keep everything as consistent as possible. You don't want all your lines to be different thicknesses and whatever like that. If you want the consistency, I think getting like preparing for each line gets you that consistency throughout. So I've just switched from a 5-round shader to a 7-round shader, just because I just need some extra thickness just around certain edges and stuff. And plus I try to sort of like sketch in from the line inwards just a little bit, just so when it comes to magging in those sections, it just all sort of connects by the end of it, and it just has like a solid black section. just so you don't see those lines later on. So what I usually do is from each of like my lines is like I'll sketch in just around the edges a bit further into each section. So when I do come back with a mag and try and like fill in those areas, it just means that there's no like gaps missed and stuff. It just makes it more crisp up into the line. I feel like when I'm pulling like a really long line, that's even more important to get your stretch right, get your hands locked in. I always like lock in my elbows. That's sort of a thing I was taught from day one, is like get everything locked in so you feel secure and confident, and then you almost like visualize from A to B where you want to start and finish. And I think that's definitely what helps me like pull like quite a long line, because sometimes it's not as easy to keep stopping and starting. For example, what I'm about to do is like I'll get my like elbows comfy, you know, ideally like leaning on like your bed or wherever's easiest, getting your stretch right, getting everything comfortable so you're prepared to sort of do what you're about to do. A tip that I was sort of taught early on was I always look ahead of the line when I'm pulling, like, especially a long line as well. Like I'll always be looking in front of the needle so everything like locks in with like my machine, like my brain and my eyes. So it's like my whole body kind of like follows the line, which again, I feel like that helps me pull a nice, smooth, consistent line throughout. I think for this style of work as well, it's not everyone would do it in this sort of process where we do the line work, do the black, then the color. But I think for me, it brings me so much more like comfort doing it in that order, because I just feel once my line work and then my blacks are done, I can just almost relax, because the color almost seems like the fun part, because this is the part where I need to get everything precise and perfect. So when the color starts to come in, that's where I feel like I can really let my hair down and just go crazy with it. I think with techniques, it's like I'm always trying to learn new techniques from other artists who not even do similar styles to me, but like I've gone from doing like circular motions with like color packing to having some artists recommend doing sort of like a forward sort of sketching sort of technique. And again, it's obviously working out what works best for you. And like, for example, right now I've got a 7-round shader, I'm doing these like chunky sort of lines. And instead of doing like a drag line sort of pull, is like I'm just sort of slowly like just etching it in really. So now I'm like getting onto like parts of the face where there are like certain little black bits, and it's just, I'm using that kind of technique of just like slowly sort of like sketching it in just to sort of build up the shapes, you know, get all like the main features that I need in there, just so when I do come back in with a mag and start to like pack in those sections that, you know, I haven't lost my stencil. It's all sort of, I'm almost like mapping the whole thing in first with the blacks, just to give me some like, I guess, more security throughout the design. So like areas like this around like a mouth, like there are black sections within the design, and like using a round shader, I don't want to like do like a bold line through it, because I know that when I start using like mags to fill in those areas, I don't want these like bits of lines to sort of like show up darker once it's healed. So it is very much like a mapping in sort of stage, especially with like faces and stuff. I feel like one of the biggest things I've really had to sort of get patient with and get to grips with my kind of work is being patient with the process, because for like a large period of time throughout the session it's just a bunch of lines and shapes and whatever, and it doesn't really look like anything, and it's still confusing to me at times. But then I hit the point throughout the day where I'm like, okay, now it makes sense, and it all starts to like slowly come together. And I think that is why I do my line work and my blacks first, because again, it just builds that confidence that everything's in the right place, and then I can just take it from there and sort of relax a bit more. So I've been using Fusion ink since pretty much when I first started, and I've sort of never really, I've tried other brands here and there over the years, but I've always gone back to Fusion, and now I'm a very proud sponsor of theirs, and they're a great company to be a part of. I find just with their inks, they're a bit thinner and easier to work with, and I feel they just go in the skin a lot more easier than other brands that I've used. So as you can see up here with these, I've got these big sort of chunks of black, and again, like I was doing earlier, I'm just really sort of softly etching in, just again mapping it in for myself, just because when I go back in later with the mag and pack all these sections with black, I haven't lost my stencil, which is all the important information that I need throughout the piece. And because I'm just softly etching in those lines, I can then pack right over them so everything is solid. Hopefully it heals with no line work that's darker. And again, it's just for my only personal sort of comfort to just sort of slowly sketch these lines in, just so I know exactly where I am and all the sort of important information's there, ready for the colour to go in. So now all my line work's done, and all my little it's information that I need just for the next part of the process, and I'll be using a mag to sort of fill in all the black sections now, before we move on to the colour. So I've now moved to a 9 soft edge mag just to start filling in these black sections. And with these kind of things with packing is I'll try and just keep a consistent motion, just sort of slowly edging forward with a really loose sort of circular motion as well, but I try to just keep the same kind of motion throughout, just so each section is consistent. So I'll always try and pack right up to the line, but sometimes I need to go back in with a round shader just to neaten up those sections, just so each chunk of black is solid right up to the line. I found as well I almost have my machine on a bit of a sort of a diagonal angle when I'm coming forward, so it's not straight, it's not like this, it's just kind of a bit of a diagonal, just slowly coming in. But I really noticed a difference when I started keeping the same technique and motion throughout the whole piece. That's when the consistency started to improve for me. A nice little tip as well, I always put a little bit of cream over the section I've just packed, and then under the light it kind of highlights if you've missed any places, just because I don't want to have to keep going over sections that I'm trying to saturate. I'd rather just get it done first time and move on, just so the skin's not overworked. With these tight points where it goes into a diagonal, it's somewhere or another you're going to have to adjust sort of your angle of your needle. So I'll get right up into that corner and then just sort of try and bring it slowly, just etching it down, because I've started to find if I do circular motion too much, it can almost chew up the skin too easily and traumatize the skin too early on in the tattoo, and I don't want to. My biggest fear always for most people is you don't want to overwork the skin, so you kind of want to just get in and get the section done perfectly first time. So especially around this area on the leg where there's not much flesh, it's quite bony, so I'm just being a little extra cautious of how much pressure I'm doing and how many passes I'm giving it, because you don't get away with as much on this area as opposed to maybe around a more spongy area of skin. It's definitely best to just leave that section, if it's starting to look overworked and the skin's looking really unhappy, it's best to just leave that skin for now, and the best thing you can do is let it heal and check how the skin's reacted once it's healed. So you can, if you need to give it a touch up or another once over, then so be it. But again, it's all trial and error. You need to sort of recognize those mistakes and learn from them. If it does start to get a little messy and I need to clean the area, I'll only use just water on its own, because without any soaps in it and stuff, it won't wipe away too much of the stencil too early, so like I can get away with wiping it. So don't be scared to wipe the area. I just recommend using water for like the majority of the process before you start cleaning it with like soaps and stuff, because that will weaken your stencil. I think drawing helps massively with tattooing, and I know there's plenty of people that don't necessarily have like a drawing background, but it's sort of like the artistic flair that comes with it that definitely helps becoming a tattooist. And I hadn't drawn for years before I started tattooing, and so when I decided to become a tattooist and start learning, the guy that was teaching me said every day, sit down, draw something new, freehand, just get to grips with like how you're doing things, where shadows should be, and just like, again, it's knowledge as well as physically doing the drawing. But I do think it is essential to be able to have a good understanding of drawing to start tattooing, because you need that artistic mindset, which I think drawing massively helps with. So now I've started to fill in like some of the black sections, and like the area I'm working on right now is like around like the eyebrow, where I want obviously there to be a somewhat like realistic element to it. So like making sure that there's like little bits of like hair flicks and stuff. So I'm being a bit more loose with my machine, sort of like, and like flicking out as I'm like packing around the eyebrow section. So I've changed to a 13 soft edge mag by Quadrant. I've always sort of stuck with Quadrant, and even when I've tried other brands, I've always gone back to Quadrant, just because I just find their precision is just completely unmatched, and I feel like I can see the needle, I can see where the ink's going in, and it always just provides me with exactly what I need, and I feel like I can just get the job done way better and easier with these kind of needles. I think like this part of the process is just building up the shapes and getting all my like little, like, it's almost like making notes of where I'm going to go next with like the dark colors, and then slowly build up to like the lightest tones that I'm going to be using. Especially with faces, it is very much for me like mapping in the shapes of like the main features, like the eyes, nose and mouth, because they are the most important for the face. Like with this eyebrow part, I've got my mag slightly on a bit of an angle, just so I can get those like little like wispy hairs to sort of flick off from on the edges of the eyebrow section. So I'm nearly finished doing all my like black sections, so I'm just gonna like, I've just cleaned the area just to check, because I just want to see if I've like missed any like noticeable bits and whatever, just make sure each section is saturated to the best of my ability. I mean, most of it looks like there's a few tiny little bits which I'll get a little round shader out just to sort of neaten up little areas. Just because I ideally, once I've done my black sections, I don't want to have to use black again when I'm like starting to like use like bright colors, just because I don't want to run the risk of like muddying up my light colors with like black ink everywhere. So it's best just to get all my black sections done and perfect how I need them. So I've just got a 9 round shader just to like fill in like the slightly smaller parts, just because they're a lot easier to get into with a round shader. Usually with these sections with like a round shader, is I'll do like really like tight circular motion. I think just with a round shader, trying to saturate such small areas is like, you've got to do really sort of tight sort of movements, because if you're too loose with it, then it's just, you'll end up having a lot of skin showing. I just need obviously all these little black sections to be solid as possible. So working around like this area, like near the knee ditch, it's a tough area to get tattooed in, and not a lot of people can sit very still for it, which is fine. It's totally understandable, but I think my sort of approach when I'm doing this area is just be efficient and get what you need to get in first times, because you don't want to like linger around this area for too long, because it's not very nice for the customer, and it's not an easy part of the body to tattoo because the skin's very sort of soft, so which is why you need to stretch the skin really well for this area, because if you don't, then the ink's not going to go in great first time, and you're just going to have to keep going over and over it again, which isn't good for you, the tattoo, and especially the client's pain threshold, because it's a very nippy area. So now all my blacks are in place and all my line work's where I need it to be. I'm gonna start getting out sort of like the darkest sort of tones I'm gonna be using, which is gonna be, there's like a dark sort of greeny turquoisey like shadows around like the eyeballs and the mouth and the nose. So I'll probably start to like create the shapes around those areas. Again, it's all like a mapping in until I come to the last point of putting all my big bold colors in. I just want to start building up all the shapes in the faces. So that will be like the next part of the process that I'll be doing. I personally prefer just to sort of start with like my darkest colors. Again, with like faces and skin tones, sometimes I'll put in the lighter tones just to sort of create the shapes, find where like how dark I should go, because sometimes if I do my light tones, like skin tones first, it's easier to sort of like assess how much darker I need to go with like the shadows, like especially under like the nose and stuff. But I think the way I do faces and I put loads of different colors in them, it's probably a bit more self-explanatory for me just to see like which color goes where, so it doesn't matter to me too much putting in my like dark colors first. Obviously I start my designs with like the main image, which is like the faces and stuff, and once I've like messed with that and played with the colors in the face, it's almost just adding colors in and around it that complement the colors in the face, so it makes the face pop out. Because if the face is a bit more on the orangey side, which this part is, if putting all these like light greens and blues and reds behind it, it kind of helps it like pop out for me. And it's, again, it's a process with my designing to sort of, I just mess around with loads of different colors, and just, I feel like it's one of those things where once I've had a play around with different color options for like backgrounds and stuff, it's just doing it until it clicks. So I'm using just like almost like a mid-tone for like the skins and stuff, just because I'm at this point where I'm starting to lose my stencil a bit. So now I'm just gonna sort of really lightly like brush in just some of the shapes that I need, just so I know exactly which other areas that I need to fill in afterwards, just so I don't lose my stencil. And it's, if I keep going and not getting these like bits in there, then I will start to panic. So as you can see, what I've done on the face so far is it's mainly like my dark tones or like my mid tones for the nose, and it's just creating those shapes. One, so I don't lose my stencil. Two, I'm not, as you can, with my technique, I'm not necessarily like trying to solidly pack it in, because I'll be like layering over it with like the lighter tone and stuff. But for now, it's like that's already securing all these shapes and curves that I need, and giving me all the information I need for like the next tone and the lighter tones and stuff, just so I don't get lost. But now, like already, like that's, I can relax so much more just seeing all these shapes come to life now. I think when it comes to like blending, I'm a bit loose with it, so I just sort of, I'll pack where I need to pack, and then I'll sort of just keep softly like whipping out towards the edges for wherever I'm like coming back in with another tone. So when I do use the next tone along, it's sort of, they all just start to connect seamlessly, so it just gives it that smooth finish. I think getting into color and learning color theory, like, there's a lot to digest and like understand and stuff. So a lot of the time when I'm not fully certain as to what colors it should be and should go where, is like a lot of the time is like I'll dip into 2 different inks that I think that will work or hopefully create a color that I'm looking for, and I'll literally just, you know, look on my tissue, just keep checking, add some more darker tones, lighter tones, until I just almost like stumble across the kind of color and shade or brightness that I'm looking for. Like this sort of like dirtyish olive color that I've just put in like the crevices and like the shadows of the eyes. It's like I don't technically have that color out in my palette right now, but just sort of trying, again, it's like it's just testing things out with colors, because there's endless options of what you can create mixing. So I love sitting down and like mixing different colors together and seeing what you can create, especially with this piece. Like I can't necessarily figure out exactly what tone this is, but you know, it's as soon as I sort of mix a few different colors together, you can really like stumble across some like interesting ones. So now moving on to like the solid chunks of color, which is like, I guess, the backgrounds and stuff and like filling in the gaps. But to get these like solid colors, I'm always just trying to focus on consistency, saturation, keeping my hand movement consistent the whole way through, just so it doesn't have patches when it heals, because the idea is that it's all just solid one color. So now I'm doing this blue section that's going to slowly just merge into like turquoise. So what I'll do around the middle is start to whip out my machine just so it gets softer and softer. So when I do go back in with the turquoise color, that they will just gradually sort of merge and have like a smooth blend to it. Another thing I do when I'm blending 2 colors is whatever the first color I'm using, I don't like clean out my needle. I'll like double dip into the next color, just so there's almost, it creates like a middle tone between them two, so they sort of like glide a bit more like smoothly into like the next color. I think with these like color sections where like there is no outline, it just takes a lot of practice to get to the point where you're like confident enough with your machine and mag, so you can almost, because I angle my machine on a bit of a diagonal, so I can just slowly like etch in that sort of line. And again, later on I can get a round shader and neaten it up if I need to, but because like the outline of this section doesn't have to be like a perfectly straight line, it can be a bit sort of jagged and whatever, is that I just sort of, yeah, I use my mag and I just slowly like edge it in, really. Over the last few years, as I've done like more and more color, is the biggest thing I've had to learn is patience, because at first the skin can look a bit upset and angry and bloody and stuff like that, and you're not sure if you've, you know, packed it correctly or whatever. But I think when you give it a few minutes to settle down and then you look back and you go, oh, okay, cool, I've done it. It's just, and I still struggle with that today, is like being patient with the skin, letting it settle. If you need to fix up a few bits, then no, that's no problem. But patience is definitely a big thing with color, because you've got to clean the skin, you've got to make sure you don't muddy up other colors and stuff. But once you can like try and relax and be patient with it, it's worth it. So I'm just onto like the last few bits, and then I'll do all the white details, and that will be this section done for today. So we're all finished for today. I'm just gonna let it settle down for 5–10 minutes, and then I'm gonna wrap him in tattoo armor, which will soak up all the excess blood and plasma and settle it down overnight. So when he comes in tomorrow, his leg's nice and fresh for me to reapply the stencil and finish the piece. So it's day 2, I've taken off the pad and I've reapplied my stencil to the ankle. Mainly today I'm going to be using my slightly softer machine, which is a 3mm, and the machine is the Acus. It's mainly because the ankle's quite tight skin and it tends to swell up quite quickly. So again, a little bit of a softer machine, and just I have to be a bit more delicate around the area that I tattooed yesterday. So today it's a bit of a similar process to yesterday. I'm going to start sort of mapping in like my sort of lines and my blacks, just to sort of create sort of like a structure for me to continue on with the colors later. I'm mainly going to work from like bottom to top, just to give yesterday's section as much time as possible just to settle down. So I'm just using a 7-round shader just to softly go in with building up the shapes, especially just for the blacks. So same again as yesterday, I'm just using this round shader just to sort of etch in these lines, just to sort of create like a border. So when I go in to using a soft edge mag, I'll just pack right up to these lines. I feel like a great bit of advice that I'm always trying to sort of improve myself is just not getting like stuck in my own ways, and be open to like new information, new tips and tricks from other artists, because I feel like there's been so many occasions where another artist has sort of given me like a little tip of theirs, and it's just given me this like huge like light bulb moment, and it's been an absolute like game changer for me to take in. And I love picking up on new tips and tricks. So again, like asking other artists questions, going to seminars, and especially going to like conventions, and just not being afraid to like ask silly questions to other artists, because you never know what you're going to pick up. Doing this process like with sort of like etching in like the shapes and stuff, I think because my designs have so much going on and there's so many cuts and straight lines and stuff, I think it's more just for my own security that everything's in the right place and I know where everything is, just so I don't get lost, because my stencils are quite crazy and there's so much like information to digest that it just simplifies it throughout the day. So when I get onto my colors and stuff, it's almost like a dot to dot process. I just fill in the shapes that I've created throughout the start of the tattoo. So with both of these faces, like I'll always like mess around with colors and stuff. So on both of these, they've got like all like the dark shadows are like a greeny sort of turquoise. It's just my little way of like, you know, making it my own and just giving it a bit more of like a colorful like flair to it. So because I'm not necessarily trying to go for like ultra high realism, it's just I want it to still be like a bit more fun and like playful with like extra little colors and tones and stuff like that. So it just almost like builds more character and contrast to the image. So what I'm doing at the moment is just sort of like lightly like mapping in all like the really important information in the face, just so I don't, again, I'm starting to lose my stencil a bit already, and there's a lot of like really important details in the stencil to obviously make sure I get the face looking realistic and getting all the correct shapes for like the curves of like the nostrils and the eyes. I'll come back into this later, but it's just to sort of get everything in place ready for me to finish it off later. I think for anyone like starting out, one of the most important things is just learn the basics and really get confident with the basics, because even now, like after tattooing for coming up to like 7 years, I almost enjoy when I get to do like a sort of a more like simpler piece with, you know, even if it's just like something simple with like bold line work and stuff. I feel like all the basics that you do need to improve, it's like you'll always need them. And I feel like also learning, you want to be able to just take in as much information as possible, like ask as many questions as possible, and don't be scared to sort of get yourself out there. I think when it comes to saturating, it's just keeping your hand like a consistent sort of pace and like technique, just because if it starts changing up too much, you're going to end up with inconsistent sort of outcomes. So I'm always just trying to focus my hardest on keeping my hands same speed, same movement, just throughout each section that I'm doing. I feel like I've been influenced by like so many different things, even from like what I was interested in as a child and like drawing when I was from a young age and stuff. But I'd say since I've become like a tattooist, is obviously I'm influenced by other artists and stuff, but like a lot of it's like street art. So like when I see like a billboard that was, you know, you can see like it's been torn down and you can see like last month's billboard and all that, it's sort of, I think I try and like use those kind of like bits of inspiration and all these colors like all over the place and like try and put it into my design, because a lot of my designs I kind of go for that whole like jumble of images that have just been ripped and stripped and like split together and stuff, just to create something that has some sort of flow at the same time. There's a few occasions where I've been in somewhere in London or whatever, and like I've seen like a random bit of street art or graffiti and stuff, and like I've taken pictures of it and tried to almost like use those, if I don't use that exact picture I've taken, is like at least use that inspiration, because I feel like even people like Banksy and stuff, like the randomness of their art and stuff, and I see posters on the street and I almost want to take just like a slight chunk from that and then use that as like a background in one of my tattoos, and just collaborating loads of different styles and images together is kind of what creates my creativity from like a day to day. Trying to create a style is the biggest issue, is trying too hard to try and create a style, if that makes sense. So I didn't necessarily like just create this kind of style overnight. It's progressed and progressed over like the last sort of 3 or 4 years, where the first like set of designs I basically did 10 designs, offered them out for cheap just to get like a feel for what, you know, how they were going to look as a tattoo and stuff. And like it's just evolved and evolved over the years. And I think, again, going back to like learning as like sort of an apprentice, it's never avoid like learning the basics, because I think if you try and create a style straight away when you're not even familiar with what your like strengths and weaknesses are, you might miss out on something amazing that you could be creating. So I feel like once you're comfortable with like the basics and you've tried different styles and stuff, see what you actually prefer the most. Like I did a lot of like black and grey portraits for a good year, and then like slowly started to bring in like pops of colour into them, almost like a trash poker kind of style. But then gradually I wanted to use more colour, and like it's taken me a good year or two now to get to this sort of point where it is full colour. And even as my designs have progressed, like my ability and techniques and stuff have progressed, so I'm like able to slowly like use more like intricate and detailed and realistic images, because my abilities hopefully like progressing year by year. And I think that's another thing with like creating a style, is like create something that you feel is original to you and authentic to you, with the abilities you've got at that moment in time. And then each year it's always nice to like look back at my work and go, wow, actually I have progressed and my designs have progressed. And it's like, it's very much the trusting your process and trusting your progress as well. So usually I would do all my blacks first, but in this scenario I was starting to lose my stencil around the face area a bit too early on than I'd liked. So again, like adapting on the spot to sort of start like mapping in like the most like important bit of information of the stencil, like helped me, one, not lose the stencil, lose where I was, and like I'll come back to the face later on, but now that's sort of in place and I can relax a bit. Even around here on this ear part, I'm already starting to lose the stencil, hence why I'm getting straight onto there, getting in all the information that I need. So then once I've done that, all these blacks in the ear, then I can actually, you know, just settle and relax and get into it again. So just before I do the whites, I'm just going to go in with a 7-round shader and just fine tune and tighten up certain little areas that I've missed and just make everything as precise as I want it to be. So I'm happy with everything I've done now with the colours and the details. I'm going to move on to the white now. I feel like I never want to go overboard with the whites, just because I feel like as long as there's like sort of other like darker tones either side of it, it will really make it pop out. But I don't want to like rely on just using the white, because it doesn't always heal as bright as it does when it's fresh. So it's just to sort of literally highlight the areas that are obviously surrounded by like darker tones and stuff, which usually just helps it pop out even more. So I've just finished all my whites. I've just checked over any little bits that I've maybe have missed, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. So we're going to let it settle for 5–10 minutes before we start taking pictures and videos, and then I'll talk you through my aftercare. So now the tattoo's finished, I've cleaned him up, I've put a light layer of cream on him. I'm now going to apply the tattoo armour, which I'm going to get him to leave on overnight, and in the morning take it off, get in the shower, clean it off with lukewarm water, pat it dry, and then reapply another pad for another 24 hours. So with tattoo armour, I just find that it's the safest way, the cleanest way. It also gives me reassurance that it's protected, especially for the first 24 hours when the skin's very much open and prone to maybe getting any kind of like bacteria on it, so it keeps it protected. And I've just found with my style of work now is it's a lot of trauma to the skin, and I feel like this whole way of healing is basically just drying the tattoo out before you start creaming it and letting all the broken skin sort of heal back together first and almost create a layer over it before you start creaming it. It's also great that it soaks up all the excess plasma and blood, so again, it's not just sat there stewing in its own gunk, it's actually like helping the whole piece just sort of settle even better. Right, so the tattoo is all padded up with tattoo armour. What I usually do is message my client 2 or 3 days after the piece, check in with them, make sure there's anything they need to know or if they've got any other questions for me. And that's the tattoo finish, guys. Thank you so much for watching my tutorial. If you liked what you've seen, please give it a thumbs up. Any questions, drop them in the comments or drop me a message on my Instagram, which is simon.tattoos. And I need to get this little guy home because it's way past our bedtime. Cheers.